right. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We are delighted to have you here at the Healing and Social Justice through Repatriation panel. My name is Katie Malone. I'm with the McClung Museum here at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And we have people from all across the country and even a couple of international folks joining us. And I really thank you for taking the time you took to come and be a part of our program today. And please know that this program will be recorded. The chat feature has been disabled because there are too many folks and we wanted to make sure that we have a good, solid discussion. So if you have questions regarding the content that we're going to be presenting, I hope that you will use the Q&A feature so that we can make sure that everybody gets to our panelists get to have a chance to answer those questions and to go ahead and as they can. So thank you so much for that. With that, I want to do a land acknowledgement, and I want to thank the land and water that were here before us who gave us life. We acknowledge together that the University of Tennessee Knoxville occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Cherokee, Aniunwaya, and Muscogee, Yuchi, and Muscogee Creek, Shoya, and Shawnee peoples. We offer this land acknowledgement to make visible these histories and peoples, and to make visible and affirm the university's commitment and accountability to Native American and Indigenous peoples. So I want to say that UT doesn't currently have an official land acknowledgement, though I know colleagues who are working on this, and they in fact wrote this language. This lag is intentional because it's important to have a land acknowledgement that's backed by action. As an institution, the museum is working to repatriate ancestral remains and belongings and materials. And we hope that this is a part of that action. It's outlined in our 2023 strategic plan as we work to do this work with renewed purpose. So as I noted before, today's program will be recorded. And I want you to know that, again, the Q&A feature is the way that we will be looking through all of the questions. Our speakers will get to them as they are able. I also want to thank the support of the museum staff who helped with today's program and putting it together. And I also want to thank our generous sponsors, the UT Office of Repatriation and the Tennessee Valley Authority. One final thing before I start to introduce our panelists is that if you are local to UT, if you're here in Knoxville or close by, our Native American Student Association is hosting a program next Thursday on April 6th here at the museum. We'll be screening the film What They've Been Taught, which is from the Reciprocity Project. And the students will present an interview that they did with the film's director, Britt Hansel. She's working on a very popular Netflix show called Reservation Dogs, and we were really excited that the students were able to chat with her. I hope you'll be able to join us in person. If you want to know more about that program, details will be on our website, which is mcclungmuseum.utk.edu. And now to tell you a little bit about our speakers. Our first speaker is RaeLynn Bulter. RaeLynn is a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation. She currently serves as the manager of the Historic and Cultural Preservation Department at the Muscogee Creek Nation. She's from Peach Ground Ceremonial Ground and the Raccoon Clan. She has a Master of Science degree in Botany and Plant Pathology from Purdue University and a BS degree in Environmental Science from Haskell Indian Nations University. Deanna Byrd is a registered professional archaeologist that completed her education at the University of Oklahoma and Illinois State University. She serves as the NAGPRA Liaison Coordinator for Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. She's currently working with several institutions across the United States for the respectful repatriation of ancestors as a part of the comprehensive nationwide search No Stone Unturned project. Deanna works to educate on the importance of Choctaw historic preservation, Indigenous archaeology, tribal collaboration and advocacy, and the healing aspects of NAGPRA across the country. Last but certainly not least, our third panelist is Miranda Panther. Miranda Panther is the NAGPRA officer for the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, Tribal Historic Preservation Office. She's been employed by the tribe in this position for almost 14 years. She graduated with honors from Western Carolina University with a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice. And she also has a graduate school degree, or she also attended a graduate school at WCU for social work. Miranda is responsible for NAGPRA compliance for the EBCI. This entails drafting repatriation and disposition claims, participating in consultations, securing protected reburial sites with federal partners within the Cherokee's 8 Aboriginal state territories, and planning all reburials. We are extremely lucky to have these panelists joining us today. These are all extremely accomplished and well-suited people to talk about this topic. And I am really delighted and honored to have each of them with us.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I think I'll just go ahead and get started and just talk a little bit about the NAGPRA work that we do here in my office at the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and how we kind of got started to where we are. And then I'll pass it to Miranda and RaeLynn, and you guys can kind of share that. You know, our department started in 2012, and when I started in 2015, we were getting notices, you know, sometimes from universities, sometimes from federal agencies. And, you know, it occurred to me then that this was just a small piece of that picture. And so we worked with our cultural advisors and came up with a research document that we wanted to reach out to institutions across the country and just find out where our ancestors were. You know, at that time, you know, people heard me share this before. I was like, okay, with a research background, this is it. I'm going to find all of our ancestors in a year flat, and that's it. And then I got reminded that this is multi-generational work, and I had to let that kind of sit in a little bit. And we've made a lot of progress, but I know that it's just, you know, kind of a drop in the bucket for this work and the work that we do. But to me, that feeds into the justice aspect of this work, is being this advocate, making decisions for our ancestors in terms of their care. Simple suggestions like, you know, can you put curtains over these windows as they're being, you know, examined, and the NAGPRA process is happening. You know, to me, that's justice for them. And then the completion is that justice, again, is moving towards that. And so we've been doing this. We are on our second phase of our No Stone Unturned project. We're going back now and revisiting those institutions that didn't answer before. And what I found just in that 4 to 5 year time period is that there's such a movement to really concentrate on NAGPRA and these institutions, that where there wasn't a NAGPRA representative or even a program before, now there is. And so that's really exciting. One of the things that we also decided to do with our tribal partners was form an alliance. And this is a loose alliance in recognition of everyone's sovereignty. But it's a way for us to advocate together, advocate for, you know what, I don't see this tribal partner here at the table, you know, let's schedule a meeting with them included. And it's a way for us to have contact information out there, and just let people know that we're willing to set up introductory calls. We've actually got 3 in the queue for the end of April, first part of May. And this is where institutions can come on a call, meet everyone at one time, and then, you know, take those consultation discussions away from that. And so those are kind of the things that we have decided to do in our department to be proactive, and kind of address this need that's there. But I'll let Miranda and RaeLynn kind of inform you kind of about their NAGPRA work and what that looks like on their end.
Would you like to go,
RaeLynn? Okay, sure.
Okay.
I don't know who's going to go.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Grateful to be here today. I really like the title of this panel, and I think it is important to talk about that justice as a part of repatriation and NAGPRA, but also healing. Our tribe has been doing NAGPRA work. I think our first reburial was in 1999. And so even though NAGPRA had already been passed in 1990. Once those inventories start to be completed and submitted by 95, we start getting tons and tons of mail at the tribe, and those inventories were coming in, and it took some time for the leadership to understand, what does this mean, what's happening, and it really kind of facilitated the growth of our department, the Historic and Cultural Preservation, which originally started as just the library and archives, and then kind of created, we needed people to look into this. And then once we started getting, the department ready, it was also took a couple of years for cultural practitioners and traditional people in the tribe to come together and think about, how are we going to do this? What does this entail? Are we ready to do this? We had to prepare. It took time to confront your ancestors in that way. It took education. It took a lot of effort to understand why these collections exist. Why were our ancestors dug up? What happened? And it's an overwhelming number of how often it happened. We have ancestors all over the country and the world, and the trafficking of those ancestors. There's so much that has happened after we were removed from the Southeast, and so it was really like playing catch up and building capacity to start to do the work. And so we have always done NAGPRA, but it really is something that just fell upon the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And we finally, by 2017, had put in a request to have funding, just to have a designated NAGPRA position that could help us work in that area. And so Mr. Emmett Spain is our current NAGPRA officer for Muscogee Creek Nation. And I've learned so much from him on, really, he's been in this line of work for over 20 years. And so he, institutional knowledge and everything about how many different sites and cases that have come up throughout the years. And so I'm really grateful to have learned from him, and grateful to be here today and help share a little bit more about what we've been working on at the Muscogee Creek Nation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Miranda Panther. I'm pleased to be here as well and to be able to speak with Deanna and RaeLynn on this very important topic. So our TPHO office was created before I was here, but I believe it was in the late 1990s. For sure, I believe by 2000. And even though our office is really small, there's only 7 of us total. We've been lucky to have a dedicated NAGPRA person for the majority, if not all of that time. Currently it's me, but I'm hoping, at some point either I'll work myself out of a job or I will leave the next person in a much better place than kind of what I inherited from my predecessor. As RaeLynn was saying, we were inundated with inventories and a lot of correspondence from everyone from across the US. So that definitely took some time to get caught up and to kind of get your feet about you so that you can start participating in consultation meetings and planning reburial. So that definitely takes a period of time. And one of the practical considerations that I've been able to do during my time at the Eastern Band is really create a server or a system for us to document who we're working with, about how long that project or consultation is taking, the number of ancestors and their belongings that we will be repatriating or getting back through the disposition process, so that we can plan appropriate reburials with federal partners or on tribal lands as necessary and available. Because before me, they kept paper copies of things, and just technology, and that's not feasible when you're working with hundreds or thousands of inventories from places across the US. So I've been lucky to be able to streamline, I feel like, that process a little bit. And I think the primary function of my position and our office is to get ancestors and their belongings back and reburied in a dignified and respectful manner, because of course their graves were desecrated and looted without their permission. So I really take advocating for them seriously, and I think everyone in my office feels the same way about the somberness of that type of task. Luckily, over the past few years, we've been able to start concentrating additionally on getting museums such as McClung to take down artifacts, associated funerary objects, sacred objects off display. And we're hoping that other museums across the country will continue to follow. Don't want to say lead, because it should have been done a long time ago, but hopefully a lot of other people will start to practice the same type of displays, and you having tribal involvement and collaboration to help design exhibits that are appropriate for people to view. And I feel like RaeLynn and Deanna do as well, taking any type of ancestor figures or sacred objects down, removing them from public view. Those are often issues that tribes were never consulted on. And so we're able to have a say now and have a voice in what that looks like. I know sometimes the public doesn't understand why that is an important task for us all to embrace. So hopefully these types of discussions can help further that sentiment. And we feel strongly about public outreach and education from a tribal perspective. Along with that, we like participating in research requests. A lot of colleges and universities, the professors or the faculty that work there really are pushed to publish articles, whether that's they're doing current scientific research, or they want to publish images that tribes hadn't previously been consulted on. So we're really trying to advocate and have a big voice in that respect as well. I think that's something that's been overlooked for a long time. So we're trying to rectify those mistakes. I think all of that keeps all of us very busy.
Yes, it does. And so I guess we'll pull in one of the questions from Katie Andrews. She said, can you all speak to the phrase confront the ancestors? And I think you mentioned that, RaeLynn. So I'll kind of start and then we'll go around robin. But I think and it looks like she wants to get her question live. Is that possible? Katie,
That just means you're going to answer it out loud.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll answer it out loud then. Sorry about that. Yeah, and I think just for me, that was one of the things that this isn't, in recognition that this isn't something that we were taught. This isn't something that's part of our culture or heritage, to be able to perform ceremony or to go and even go into institutions and understand what that's like, that spiritual component. It's not something that's passed down. So there is no training, there's no field book, there's no we really had to just explore new options. And I think for us, we have a group of elders and cultural advisors that we go to, especially on the hard questions. If we get a situation that we haven't dealt with before, we want to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And for us, I think that just is acknowledgement that, we have kind of a position that's set apart. And when we go into these institutions, we're their advocate, and that's something we needed to learn about, right? And we needed to be prepared. We needed to get their counsel on how to go about doing that in a very respectful way and to be very delicate in that role. So that's kind of what that question means to me, but I'll let you guys kind of answer for yourselves what that means for you.
Yeah, for me, when I say that term, it's really because you don't know what to expect when you go into a curation facility or you're going to view collections. And there's also a lot of cultural and spiritual protocols. So in our culture, women aren't supposed to be the ones who are burying people, or really it's taboo to even be around remains. And so, but ironically, you see a lot of women in this field of work, especially Native women, who are stepping up saying, hey, this stuff needs to happen, let us take care of it. But we still rely a lot on we definitely follow the cultural protocols on who can handle or who does those kind of things. So I can help with the paperwork all day, and then the actual physical transfer and things like that happens by people who are trained and prepared and have prepared themselves to be around in that environment. But when I'm saying confront, I have been to where I've seen our ancestors being prepared for reburial, and it just was very hard to see what they looked like. When you think about your grandparents and you think about when you go to funerals, you still see a shell of a person, but in this instance, to see skeletal remains was very difficult for me. And I so confronting that, but also we tell them sorry that this happened to you. We tell them we're doing everything we can to respectfully get you back to where you need to be. And that's a hard conversation. That's why I say you're confronting them and trying to let them know what's happening.
Yeah, like RaeLynn said, for Cherokee folks, women aren't supposed to be around ancestors, human remains, or the objects that they were buried with. So luckily, 2 of my coworkers who are enrolled members of the Eastern Band, they're 2 gentlemen, they're traditionalists as well. So I do all the planning and all the paperwork and that type of thing, but really they're the ones that go out and complete the physical transfers from these museums and universities, and they go and do the reburial. And there are certain protocols and things that they need to do to prepare that are private and personal to them. And it's something that the tribe, over the amount of time that they've existed, couldn't have imagined that they would need to come up with these protocols or need any type of ceremony or really know what to do. So we have an active elders advisory board who have helped us over the years come up with kind of burial guidelines or treatment guidelines for human remains and objects. And so we really lean on them, and we pick their brains a lot about different kinds of situations, because before I started working here, I wouldn't have even imagined some of the things that get brought up about research requests, or how human remains have even come to be, languishing on shelves for decades or hundreds of years, or knowing that museums and universities would purchase them from people who were basically grave robbers. It's just crazy to think about that type of practice has been allowed to exist and even encouraged in academia. So we're really trying to right those wrongs and get people back into the ground as quickly and as respectfully as possible.
Yeah, so we'll take another question too. And Katie Andrews says, this work is very emotional. How do you care for yourself? And I think that this is a huge proponent of our work. And I'll just kind of start the ball rolling. I really love, I mean, just truly love everybody that I work with, all my brothers and sisters, RaeLynn, Miranda, all of our Star Alliance partners, we're like a family. And it's so nice. I'm gonna start crying, but it's so nice to be able to come together, because we know what it's like to get to that finish line. And so anytime we're coming to, even have a consultation or discuss or make plans, there's just this really sense of unity and family there. And so that's really helpful, I think. Having a support system is really critical. And then also, I have a family of my own. And so at some point I have to kind of be able to put this, kind of close the book for a little while and go home and take care of things. But, with this work, you don't ever turn it off. It's not something, it goes home with you. It's something that, I, might find some time when everyone's asleep to pray and to research something, or I might get a phone call about an inadvertent discovery or a meeting that we need to schedule about something. And so, it is a 24/7 job, but it's really important for myself to carve out that time, and find, whether it's beadwork or artwork or something like that to sink my teeth into so that I can, have that. And so I'm a big proponent of self-care, because I know that, and taking breaks. I think for, when I think it was probably a couple years after I started, and I remember going through an inventory, and it, I've spoke about this before, but, I lost my first child. And so when I was going through the inventory and saw the little bone comb that was laid to rest with a child that had been separated and removed, which often happens in institutions, the skeletal remains of our ancestors will go one direction and the funerary items will go another or put on display. And that just hit me. It hit me that that was removed from that child, thinking about the loss that our family had and that family standing there, that was really tough. And so I had to kind of step back and work on, something else. And so, I think in some regards, some people might think, okay, well, you're probably used to it by now. No, you don't ever get used to it. And I think that that's what's important to remember, is that yes, we may deal with this day in and day out. Yes, we're in phone calls and in consultations where we have to be asked really graphic questions about what our choices are. You never get used to it. And so it's important to kind of build in some things that help you take care of yourself. One of those that I do is we started a Choctaw literacy project. And so it's a historical project for K through 4. And so when I've had kind of a rough day with consultations and things, it allows me to kind of close the book and move over to that, something that's completely different. And that's been a huge blessing to be supported by leadership to do that for our historic preservation, and really focus on the children and go into the classrooms, because it allows me to have that complete contrast. I'm dealing with death and the atrocities and the injustice, and also the healing part. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But then I can focus on these kids' laughters and their smiles and going into the classroom and being goofy and reading stories. And so that's how I kind of balance and take care of myself. But I'll let you guys chime in too.
Yeah, it is very difficult work. It's emotionally taxing, spiritually, but it's also important, and it's a responsibility that we have been given, and we try to, as Miranda said, hopefully you work yourself out of a job. We hope in a decade that maybe there are no more NAGPRA collections to repatriate. And I've heard that some states, I think Michigan, they have repatriated everything from that state. And that's so awesome. And I really hope that we don't have another generation that has to deal with this. I think We also try to humanize the process, which again is not, it's tough, but we want to know the stories of these ancestors. And they're not just numbers. It's not just M&I. It's not just account. It's these are people. These are our relatives, and we want their story. We hear their story and learn about them as we go through the inventory process or documentation of how they were excavated, how they were laying, what they were buried with. And so we tried to really bring that component in, and our you get a sense of reward after the reburial, that we got to help them. And so there is also that aspect too that comes in, even though it is difficult. And we also kind of go about repatriation in a way that gives us time to decompress. And we might discuss it a little bit, but that's kind of some concerns with some of the newer NAGPRA regulations that could come out, that it's going to rush the NAGPRA process, that tribes need time. You don't want to go to a funeral every day. We physically can't rebury spiritually, culturally every week. It's so hard. And in certain times of the year, we can't do it at all due to our ceremonies. So we have to really go about it in a way that respects our time and our healing and the way that we can get through it the best that we can. So, it is difficult, but I would say that it's also rewarding to know that we're helping put people back to rest, let them go back to where they're supposed to be. And that is the justice part, is that finally, they're where they need to be.
I definitely think part of the healing or things that bring me peace is being able to talk to folks at other tribal offices about our jobs or things that are really frustrating, or how difficult it is to work with a certain institution or a certain person, because I can't take that home, or I can't necessarily talk to my friends about it who aren't working in the field, because there would be so much discussion and explaining that would need to be done. So it's good that you have people in your office and in other offices that we work with all the time that understand the same difficulties or obstacles that you have. And the NAGPRA process, can be a very long endeavor, especially when you have a lot of cases going on concurrently. You do need time to plan appropriately. We don't want to rush per se, but sometimes if it's taking just years and years, which is why I track that information, I want to know how many months it took from beginning to end on average for, an NAGPRA project. And it's really uncommon, I feel like, to take, anywhere in the year range. I would say that's a really quick project from start to finish. I feel like they're typically closer to 5 years or 3 years. Some of them have taken a decade. Some cases are still going on that started before I even came to work here. So it's definitely not any kind of instant gratification. You got to keep plugging along. So something that may sound really silly, but that I like to do at work when I'm having a really bad day or a rough week, I actually like to go cut grass across the road at the Gadua property. I'll just get on a tractor, and there's a bush hog behind me, and just put my AirPods in and jam out and cut grass, because I'm this is an instant change. This is the instant reward that I'm getting. I get to see grass being cut, and now this looks pretty all of a sudden, where it was very weedy and overgrown before. So people seem really surprised, my boss especially, that I like to do that. But I'm you just kind of need something that you can see automatically a change happening, because otherwise it takes a really long time. to pursue like justice and to heal, especially when, you know, you can only do it certain periods of the year. I like to take the gentlemen's like ceremonies and stuff that they need to do, you know, because they can't be around people and stuff for certain time periods after a reburial. So we have to be really careful and considerate in our planning, and it requires a lot of travel sometimes. So yeah, I like to just vent to people who are in the field and cut grass.
That's awesome. Okay, so we'll take another question. I think this one I'll start too. Is are there items being repatriated that are unrelated to burials? For Choctaw Nation, we recently did a repatriation of the LaFleur pipe, and this was from the Gilcrease. This pipe was used at the signing of the Dancing Rabbit Creek Treaty. This was the treaty that ushered in 70 plus years of removal for our tribe. And it's on loan, or it was on loan when we opened our new cultural center and part of our Trail of Tears wing, and talking about that narrative, and it was there. And we were asked by Chief Batten to go and pursue a repatriation grant under not necessarily a sacred object, but an object of cultural patrimony. And so we were able to petition the Gilcrease Museum, and they were able to repatriate that. So that was able to come home. And so it's nice. We did a write-up in our monthly newspaper, and shared with people so that they knew it was here and that we worked to get it back. So that was one of our non burial repatriations. Do either of you want to share if you want to comment on one that you've done?
You know, one thing that comes to mind is we were aware of a very sacred object but it didn't end up being part of a burial, but it was never part of a NAGPRA inventory or summary because the remains were missing, and just the documentation that a farmer was disking his field and found the object. And but it was never, like I said, never part of any inventories in the 90s or anything like that. And came to light, and, you know, very sacred object. Many people still have stories and oral histories about this in our community. And it was a shared object with the Shawnee tribe also, when there were a lot of interactions between us. And we brought the information back, and there were a lot of folks in the community who were confused, alarmed. How did they get this? You know, what happened? And it's you know, almost even that we're so unworthy today to even touch it. Nobody wanted to even, you know, nobody wants to speak on behalf of that. It's such an important thing. And really, you know, we talked about, well, if we could make a claim under NAGPRA and at least have, you know, control over people doing research on it, or people who have access to it. If we make the claim, then, you know, we could do a care and trust agreement to leave it at that facility where we would not have to come and get it or touch it or rebury it necessarily unless we wanted to, but just to kind of have more authority over what happens to it. And even that alone, people were nervous that, you know, that could, you know, you need to really think about it. So it's something that we haven't encountered that much, and are still on the fence on how to proceed on some of those kind of objects. Just so culturally sensitive. And, you know, so the other thing that comes to mind is, you know, in joint repatriation efforts, you know, there are some dog burials associated with sites that didn't make it to inventories. They're not considered funerary objects. They're not considered human remains, but you could tell that that dog was buried with intention and had love and care the same way as everyone today loves their pets. You know, tribal people did too. and that they were part of the family. And so, there have been some better situations and outcomes now that have listed them as sacred objects, I guess, or different types of categories that are not necessarily directly connected to a burial, but we're able to successfully repatriate the dog burials as well. So those are a couple of things that come to mind.
We have a couple as well. We just recently repatriated some bear regalia from the Pequot Museum. I don't know how it got to be there or why it was on display, but luckily we just got that back a couple of weeks ago, and it consisted of like a bear hide cape, which had a map of sorts painted inside of different houses and their location to each other. Excuse me, from the Big Cove community, which is a community that still exists in Cherokee today. And it had a cane and a bear mask. So that was something that we were working on repatriating for a number of years. So we're lucky to have that back now, and it's not being reburied. And then we're working on a project with the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, on a basket that they had on display at their office here in Cherokee. The tribe is taking over that building, so it's reverting back to tribal control. So we became aware of this basket, and the basket was used to carry Cherokee newborns from the hospital here. And unfortunately, they were being adopted out to white families during that time period in the early 30s, probably through the 50s. So we're working really hard to get this newborn basket back as well, so that we can keep it at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian that we have here. We don't have plans to display it or anything like that, but it definitely has an ongoing cultural and historical significance to the tribe. So those are two projects that are coming to fruition, hopefully this year.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that was an important question, because a lot of our emphasis is on our ancestors and the items they were buried with. But we're open to all kinds of different conversations, and we have a lot of irons in the fire, working with many institutions on many different levels. One of the questions is talking about, how do you approach conversations with people that might push back or seem unwilling to consider another opinion? Conversations about repatriation can be challenging when speaking with someone who doesn't understand why it is important. So I guess maybe we can answer, a couple. I don't really have any suggestions, and I don't like to talk about the hard conversations that we have. And I think I take every conversation that happens like that uniquely on its own. I don't think that there's a stamp. I don't think that there's a way that you can kind of prepare for that, because it's really intimate and personal. And sometimes there's a lot of hard feelings that they've got going on, or a lot of misconceptions. And so, I try to clean up as misconceptions as possible, and I try to offer, but I think it's kind of hard to kind of come up with, at least for me, a way to approach those conversations other than, the way that I try to do it. And I know it sounds corny, but is just recognizing that, that human to human connection is really important. When you kind of tear down, titles, and you tear down what's really happening, and you tear down consultation and policy, we're talking human to human. And I think that I have more experience or more luck or more pushback in those kinds of ways, in addressing that way. But I don't really have anything else to offer. Do you guys?
A big part of this work is building relationships, and somebody who clearly doesn't get that, or has those kind of opposition or confusion, or I try to look at things on both sides, and I can understand how somebody who has been curating or managing collection for 50 years, 40 years, how they feel a personal attachment to it. And all of a sudden a tribe comes along and then everything leaves, or they've dedicated their whole career to studying these items. And, so I can see sometimes they're where they're coming from, but I want them to also see the human side of it too, how those ancestors didn't have consent, and how, folks have been benefiting and profiting off of the study of these ancestors for too long. And that, we're here to help have justice for them and respect for them. And so I would say in a situation like that, let's try to work together more. We need to build a relationship. Obviously, we don't understand each other or where we're coming from. And that takes time. And so, there may be people who always have that opposition. And I hope they retire soon. It's tough to, we have a good heart coming into this. And we just want to have conversations and get to know each other and work together it's never too late to do the right thing. And so, those kind of things happen, unfortunately, but I don't think that I think that we just need to do better with building those relationships, and then they'll start to soon understand. If you talk to our elders, if you come visit us in our communities, you're going to see how important this is. And I hope that would cause a change of heart.
I agree with what RaeLynn and Deanna have said about it. We make every effort to make it a human rights issue. And given that we're all human, it should be something that we all understand and that we see why it's so important. And just as strongly as that researcher or curator feels about this collection, and they feel some type of ownership, or that it's just a data set when really it's a human being, whether they're represented by a tooth or a skull or different skeletal elements, like that's a person. And I always just go back to that. And we may agree to disagree about the ways that tribes versus the academic or the scientific community may feel about it. But I would like to think that we're going to be on the right side of history when it comes to this issue. And I feel like RaeLynn said, hopefully that's more of like an old school way of thinking, and hopefully these younger generations of archaeologists and anthropologists that are coming up are learning, that it's not scary to work with tribes, and that it is something that they should do. And, tribes have been disenfranchised in all different issues and areas throughout history. So it's sad that we have to have a legal mechanism called NAGPRA to be able to get ancestors and their belongings back, but it's because of people like some of these people that we work with who don't see why would they need to do it or why they need to participate. Like we had to have a legal mechanism so that tribes and their rights could be respected and honored. So because you just can't assume that people are going to do the right thing. I hope that they do. And I hope that we can appeal to that. But if not, I'll just write a bunch of claim letters.
Yeah, and I don't know about you two, if you want to share on this, but just in the short amount of time that I've been doing this, I've seen a huge change. And when I first started, I was talking to some elders that had done this before, and one was from another tribal community, and I was horrified. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, just because of the lengths that were gone to maybe switch custody of ancestors or move, or the disrespect that they had encountered. And I would say that 95% of the institutional representatives that I work with are really positive relationships, like, RaeLynn and Miranda were talking about. it's a long-term relationship. We're, some of us are friends on Facebook, and it's really connecting at that human level. And I've seen a huge change, and it so much so that it's almost kind of startling now when I get on a consultation and I hear somebody who's like in really stark contrast to being willing to work through the process. That's kind of like jarring to me now. And when I first started, there was no jobs to be heard of, like on LinkedIn. I set my kind of a little notifications for that, and there was none, like for months at a time. And now I get them on my phone and I just kind of smile because there's anywhere from like 1 to 6 a week. And so that tells me that there's a change of heart that's happening, and we're getting newer, a younger generation that has that passion, that has that heart, and they're leading with their heart, and they're bucking that policy, they're bucking that old school mentality in their institutions. And so, I've been really happy. I don't know if you guys want to comment on that. The tide is kind of changing.
It has been, and I'm really glad. I really think that the National NAGPRA Community of Practice Network group has really helped bring people together, as well as the Southeastern NAGPRA Community of Practice. And those are outlets that help people feel more safe, and bringing people together in all disciplines to really talk through some of the barriers of implementation. And it's been so refreshing to see so many like-minded people, and people who are, eager to learn, and we're eager to help, So I've been really thrilled to see so many changes over the last 3 years during the pandemic, really, of how this field has grown, how much awareness has gone in, especially to, the local people who are not in our fields. More and more people know about NAGPRA now, or know about these collections. And, so I've also seen that generational change and shift, and excited for the new generation to come and help us, get this goal accomplished.
Yeah, I agree with y'all. I have definitely seen a change, even in just the vocabulary, that we're using now to talk about NAGPRA. It was definitely, human remains or minimum number of individuals. And I feel like we have a lot more people now who are saying ancestors and their belongings versus funerary objects. I know those are the legal definitions, but I prefer a person first language. I feel like that's another way that we try to humanize these people who have been long deceased, but are still very special and sacred and not forgotten about. So I've definitely seen a positive change, and I'm hoping that it's something that we're just going to keep building upon. We're going to get more federal partners. We're going to get more people in the field, outside of the field, kind of spreading the word about why it's important to, not just be compliant with the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law as well, and really see this issue from a human perspective, a tribal perspective. And I definitely think the Repatriation Project, that ProPublica, those series of articles and other media attention that the subject has gotten over the past 5 years has been a big help in educating the community. I mean, a lot of people don't know that this is something that even goes on like still today. So yeah, I hope we just keep improving.
All right, so that kind of rolls us into our next question. We have a couple that I'm just going to roll together. So Hydra and Jessica, really talking about how non-Native people can support repatriation locally. But then Jessica also wants to know, in terms of education, she's finishing up her education, but she wants to know the best way to get involved with repatriation. Is there anything I can do within the field before getting my next degree? And so I think there's a couple different questions about, how can other people support this work? Do you guys want to take a stab at it first?
Sure. A lot of people are alumni of institutions that have collections. So I think that alumni letters is really great. Even at Harvard, we have Judge Bigler, who works for Muscogee Nation. He's a Uchi. He is alumni of Harvard, and reaching out to encourage them to consult and to do better. And I think that there's a lot of alumni from many institutions, and it's kind of strange, but the Southeastern tribes, we are working with the SEC football schools. Every school in SEC has collections that most people aren't aware of. So if you're an alumni from these institutions, write a letter encouraging them to fund more, to prioritize NAGPRA. I think that those kind of things could help in some of the initiatives to help get that out there. So also, we need osteologists. A lot of times the NAGPRA inventories are held up because we need someone who can determine between faunal bone and human bone. And so there's a great need for osteologists to help in this work. Just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, those are really great suggestions. And gosh, I know SEC football is like a huge deal. So I can't even pull or support any colleges or universities anymore because I work with them on this topic. And if they're not good to work with, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna support y'all anymore. So that's a great suggestion too. I would also say, if you're looking at continuing your education or going to school somewhere, check and see, the places that you're interested in attending, what their compliance is like with NAGPRA, or if some of the people who are working there in the field that you want to go into, if they've published anything saying whether they support or don't support NAGPRA, because do you really want them to be your teacher or professor? That's a reason why this old-fashioned way of thinking has continued, is because they're teaching and molding the minds of their students to believe the same way as them. So I would say do that. Contact your local Congress people to see if the state laws are strong enough, even if it's not technically NAGPRA eligible, or someplace that doesn't receive federal funding, to make sure they're checking to see if they have NAGPRA collections. Just be aware of all of the museums that you visit, if they have fantastic pieces on display. Those are probably from a grave context. Is that someplace that you want to support and visit, or encourage other people to not visit? And I would definitely say we need more money. And like RaeLynn said, we need more staff, and we need more tribal and non-tribal people who support NAGPRA in this field, so that the more staff and the more money that these places have, they don't really have an excuse to not be compliant.
Yes, I agree with those suggestions and offerings. And, I would add that I think there's room for dialogue to change. And I think sometimes we don't realize the impact we have on the people around us. And so I encourage, everybody to open that conversation. If someone's like, well, yeah, I got a whole bunch of stuff off the riverbed, and I'm just collecting, ask them why. Ask them why. What do you plan to do with that? Have you consulted with the tribes? Have you talked to somebody about that? Make it a point to be that disruptor of the norm, right? I remember there was an educator that we were working with at an agency, and she was in charge of, archaeology day for kids. And her booth and her dialogue with these kids was all about cultural stewardship. And, she had this kind of thing that she said that was really kind of blunt, but she kind of, didn't raise her voice, but she was very stern with the kids. Like, if you find something, just leave it alone, because there is this kind of tradition, this family, whether it's family outings or whether it's hobbyists or whether it's avocational, archaeologists who go out. And I think that it's time to start having these conversations, like, why, does this belong to you? Have you consulted with the tribes? And So I think there's some room there. And then, I'll kind of send it back around. But in terms of, Jessica asked about, do we have advice on trainings, classes, et cetera, that students can pursue to assist them in learning more about NAGPRA? And I think for me, my advice on that is, and it goes in with how the public can assist with our work, is, don't be afraid to call us up. I mean, I think I hear it at least 5 times a week, like, oh, I didn't want to bother you because you're so busy. I'm busy, but I will make it a priority to talk to you if you want to learn about NAGPRA, if you want to learn how to be an advocate, if you want to understand about training. And so we get probably a good number a year of graduate students. Sometimes now even high school students are reaching out about NAGPRA, and they want to learn. And they want to learn, say a different project or what they can do to learn about it. And so, I always have time, I'm only speaking for myself, but, I always make the time to engage. And, the other thing is, I would recommend joining the community of practice. It's through the University of Denver. Anna Motti is the grant and kind of the group liaison. It was her brainchild. And so, reach out to them. You don't have to have any requirements to join any of the community of practices. I think that there's talks of opening up an Eastern regional community of practice in the near future to focus on institutions in the East. But, there's all kinds of support that you can get. And even if you just want to listen and you're not really sure where to go, there's all kinds of information that you can learn just by listening. So those would be my suggestions. Do you guys have any suggestions for students that are wanting to learn more before they graduate?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend the community of practice, the NAGPRA community of practice. But also I want to plug the Association on American Indian Concerns. They're have NAGPRA conferences, and so the annual meeting is going to be November, I believe November 5th or November 7th. I know that part because that's my birthday, but it's going to be in Shawnee, Oklahoma, and excited to be able to go and attend. And that's an opportunity where you get to hear about NAGPRA on all aspects, case studies, and really a lot more tribal folks talking about, the barriers, but how to move forward. And so there's a lot of opportunities through that. But if you're a student in a program that doesn't really, you feel like doesn't talk about NAGPRA enough, I would say, these community practices they're recorded. So even if you're not available to join live, you can always look at, we have years of recordings now and we have, sessions twice a month. So there's topics, there's policy documents, there's these cool comic books out that talk about NAGPRA and help explain in a new way what's going on. And so there's a lot of resources out there. But also if you reach out to the tribes, maybe you're your professor, ask them, we want to work more with tribes. A lot of times we'll give guest presentations or talk to archaeology, anthropology students and classes or people who work in museums. So we can try to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I could potentially think of to add is, if there's not a NAGPRA specific curriculum or anything around federal cultural resource law compliance. I know that doesn't sound super exciting offhand, but there are a lot of other laws that fall into that our TPO offices have to do compliance for as well. So maybe urge your school or university to add that type of class to their curriculum. I definitely think that would be a huge benefit to not only the professor, but students as well. That would pique their curiosity. There's a lot of online resources. Definitely reach out to tribal offices as well. I'm happy to chat with anyone. And if you're from the Knoxville or East Tennessee, like surrounding area, or I think it's Florence, Alabama, they're starting new chapters of a program that TVA runs called 1,000 Eyes. And as Deanna and RaeLynn and probably some of y'all on here know, looting in the Southeast, the practice that Dan mentioned of families going out and surface collecting, on federal property, that's illegal. And it also damages the archaeological context of sites that are still intact. So I would encourage you to get in touch and volunteer with one of their chapters. They do a training session that they have tribal reps help teach that covers a broad range of topics, not just NAGPRA, but it's good to hear from tribal reps and tribal folks, like how looting has such a negative impact on all of us. So I would encourage you to volunteer for that as well.
Okay, so I've got two major can of worms to open up here. So I think I'm just going to go and go with the first one because I can actually recuse myself because I sit on a board. So I can't talk about this. If you guys do too, then it'll only be one of you, or maybe we don't get to answer it. But so Aubrey says, what are your positions regarding the scholarly public use of previously published images of sacred objects? Do you believe researchers should ask for tribal approval before using previously published images? And should the photographs be drawn out? So I'll let you two handle that.
Yes. We know that there are images out there and publications that have been done in the past that have images of ancestors and burial objects. We just want to prevent any future publications of those and make it harder to access them because, today more than ever, tribes are reading journals. We're our archaeologists. Our people are in every aspect and realm of this cultural resource world. And, we want them to be able to access this information without being discriminated against or and even though it's not intentional, it's really, the descendant community's voice has been left out. And we just, tribes have different feelings about it. But what is the harm in asking? From us, line drawings are okay. And you can do a line drawing from a photo that existed before. We just don't want any further handling of these objects. We want them reburied. And so it's a struggle, I think, for some. But yeah, it is the preference is to seek permission and, before any kind of thing like that is published.
The Eastern Band agrees. I definitely think that even if there are existing photos, those photos were almost 100% taken without tribal approval and consent. So, there's already been a wrong that has occurred, and to keep using them, making the argument like, well, they already exist, we don't have to take new ones. We were not given a say in the first place. So I think line drawings are appropriate as well. We encourage people to do that. It doesn't take a long time, and it portrays the item, I feel like, just as accurately as a digital or any type of photograph would. And you don't know what the purpose was behind the specific object that you're wanting to recreate. In certain instances, it's on a case-by-case basis, but we allow 3D scanning or replicas to be made as well. Of course, you have to ask tribes. You can't just be like, oh, they said it was okay, we can go ahead and do it. You need to ask us for every item or every time like that request comes up. We talk about it in our office and make the decision, so we don't have an overarching policy about what's appropriate or not, because that can be used against you in the future, because they'll be like, yeah, well, you let us on this and this is pretty similar. So we don't want anyone to assume that we're agreeing or complying with that. So yeah, that would be our preference.
All right, so another big can of worms, and we only have just a few short minutes, so we may not, be able to answer to the magnitude that Amy was requesting. However, I encourage you, Amy, to follow up with us and reach out to us, get our contact information, and maybe explore that a little bit more. And so the question is, do you feel like the proposed updates in NAGPRA regulations will help support you in your work, especially as RaeLynn shared about timelines or needing space between this type of work so you can care about yourselves too? I'm curious to hear more Native NAGPRA practitioner perspectives on this, and thank you for sharing today. And there was a couple other questions that kind of dabbled in that in terms of the regulation. So, I don't want to go into a whole lot about kind of our preferences and here at the Choctaw Nation. One of the things, though, that I will mention is that, I'm really looking forward to the culturally unidentifiable component being removed. I can't tell you how many times in consultation that I'm having to have really long-winded conversations and justifications and supporting evidence. And, that's just ridiculous to me to have a dissertation that I have to present. And then also, I was in consultation the other day and, this individual presented on all of the evidence that they had spent, time researching of why our community wasn't culturally affiliated. And that's insulting. And so I'm looking forward to having really just open dialogue about the legal process that's happening, the respect that our ancestors deserved. How do we move forward without having to argue over, splitting hairs? As I always mention, all of our Southeastern tribal brothers and sisters, we interacted on the landscape. We know our histories, oral traditions. We shouldn't have to come up with an argument. So that's one of the things that I think I'm in favor of and looking forward to make, that work not easier, but go smoother and take out that traumatizing component to it, because I feel like that's probably the hardest part of my job, is having to explain somebody why I get to be part of the conversation and why they shouldn't be the one making a decision. So I'm looking forward to that part of the law change.
I would just add that there are many good changes in there, and I'm glad that we're putting, taking pressure off tribes and putting them on institutions to start going through the CUI, culturally identifiable collections, and making it geographic. But I do have a little bit of concerns about that, because the information, you have to make those kind of determinations with consultation of the tribes, and there's not enough written things in the literature that support everybody's presence in certain areas at certain time periods. So it's going to be, I think, cause some confusion, but I also, really is our capacity as tribes to take on, I think there's a timeline of 2.5 years for folks to produce new inventories for their CUI collections. And I imagine at 2.45 years, all those things are going to be coming in, and we're going to be overwhelmed trying to figure out, yes, we can make a claim after, those inventories are sent out, but there may be other tribes more prepared to move forward, and inadvertently that causes everybody to move forward, because you're consulting with multiple tribes on these cases. So it does have a ripple effect that I think we have a little bit of apprehension about, but over most of those changes in the law, I think, are going to be good to speed things up. But also at the same time, some of these things need time, because they are so because of the spiritual part and the barriers of finding lands to do reburial for removed tribes. And the practitioners, no one wants to go to a funeral every day. I said that before, but that's kind of the worry, is that getting all the paperwork done, also what happens afterwards if administrations change and we get some resistance when they've technically have completed the NAGPRA process in terms of the law, but not physical transfer. And so it's I don't know, there's a lot of, I think, the good things, but also a few concerns about things, but that's all.
I would add to that, because I think they both made excellent points. I do believe that there's good intentions behind the amendments or changes, but a lot of time it is the implementation or what that looks like for tribes, and why the burden is always on us. You know, there's nothing in the NAGPRA regulations that require universities or federal agencies to provide land for reburials, like RaeLynn said. And that's a really difficult part of the process to really accomplish, because, you know, the US, of course, has a ton of land, but a lot of it is privately held, or, you know, people are always expanding, and we obviously don't want to rebury people somewhere that's going to be subject to development or expansion in the future, and they would potentially be disturbed again. So there's still definitely some shortcomings of NAGPRA, and I don't know if it's because of my background in criminal justice, but I really want people to be punished and held to a standard for not being compliant, whether that is something that they're outright doing or doing in a more like sneaky way, trying to transfer collections to other places, or, you know, saying they lack documentation or they don't have money or staff. I think you know, a lot of fines haven't been levied in the history of the NAGPRA program. And the ones that have been are really just drops in the bucket, especially for a lot of universities and colleges. So I would like that to be more of a deterrent against people not engaging with tribal communities to work through the NAGPRA process. But otherwise, yeah, it's kind of 50-50 if it's going to be a benefit, or once you get to the implementation part of the new regulations, if it's going to be just as difficult in certain aspects as it was before.
Thank you both. So we're about that time to close. So I think just going around, we've talked about a lot of hard topics. We've talked about the emotion, the spiritual. We've answered a lot of the questions that we had, and we shared our stories. I think it would be a good place to end with just sharing a joy that we've had in our role, and leaving that with our viewers, listeners. And I'll start. I think that you know, for me, I didn't realize the emotions that would come with preparing for a really large repatriation that's on the horizon. And you know, we're getting to the end of the budget and figuring all those things out. And I just found myself like kind of driving down the road, like really giddy, like it's going to happen. It's time. It's getting ready to happen, you know, and feeling that joy of being able to work through this process, and that it's taken a really long time to get here, but that excitement that they're going to get that peace, and that all of this is getting ready to come to a closure, you know, and I really like that aspect of that closure. You know, a lot of us, you know, I know for myself, you know, I take somebody with me when I go to institutions, and we pray with the ancestors, and so to see that closure of the actual repatriation happen in the reburial ceremony, you know, I have more and more joy laying them to rest, because I know that like we kept our promise, right? And so that feels really good. And so to me, that's part of that healing process, is that closure. But I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to share some joy that you have.
I would say, you know, every time we do a reburial, there's always a sign that happens, something during that time that lets us know, keep going. Thank you. And one of the times was in the last reburial that we done, we just finished, and there was an eagle that flew over, and it hit everybody. We were just so, and made us so happy that to have signs like that. And so it's a great feeling to be able to help them get back home.
I just enjoy the aspect of being able to advocate for someone who can't speak for themselves. And even though this person may be long deceased, like 10,000 years ago, I just always remember that they had friends and they had family and maybe a pet. And the people that cared about them selected a spot for them to be lovingly placed with belongings that were special to them. And I think that's a practice that we still continue to do today. And so I just enjoy having that link to the distant past and being able to represent for the tribe. And even if a lot of people don't know what we do, we definitely don't do it for fame or glory, but it just makes me feel better to be able to help someone.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please reach out to us. I don't know, Katie, if you want me to read that. I guess I will. Okay, so I want to thank each of you for sharing your time with us today. We appreciate the audience and great questions. There will be a recording after the program. Keep up with the McClung Museum on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or their website. And I was happy to be here today. And thanks for joining me, Miranda and RaeLynn. And have a great evening.